Hey there, welcome back to Online Marketing Foundations. We're still in Module 3, Connect with Your Audience. And in the last lesson, we talked about more cowbell, adding more of yourself to your brand. In this lesson, we're moving on to the first kind of core element of doing that, which is that you need to create your core stories. This is about starting to develop the content that you're going to share with your audience that will help them to really connect with you at a deep level and will build the know and like factor and even a bit of trust factor to get them to feel like, hey, this is the kind of person I want to do business with. This is the kind of person that I want to help me solve this problem. Stories are a powerful, powerful piece of that. So we're going to talk about that here in this lesson. Now, let's dive in, and we're going to start with the truth bomb, which is that telling stories lets you connect with your audience in an authentic way, but only if you're telling the right kinds of stories. And I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. One is kind of a high-level thing that is a piece that a lot of people get wrong, but we're also going to be talking about what are the right kinds of stories? What is the purpose? What are you trying to do with those stories? And you're going to learn that here, because when you get to be a master storyteller, connection is simple. People find common themes in what you talk about. They find things they have in common with you, and they will feel connected to you in a deep way. And you don't have to do any gimmicks. It's just from you telling these stories is what will happen. So that's what we're going to cover in this lesson. Let's talk about it. What you're going to learn here is that stories are more powerful than other forms of communication. We're going to talk about the fact that during the connection phase, you are the star of your stories. And that's something that a lot of people won't tell you. And I want to make sure we get that right. And then we're going to talk about the 4 types of connection stories, kind of the 4 kinds of stories you need to have in your kind of wheelhouse or in your repertoire as you are trying to connect with your audience. So let's dive in first to the concept that stories are a powerful form of communication. I hope you get this, but ultimately what I want you to understand is that human beings are wired to communicate and connect through story. We could talk about this. Look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to present you with a bunch of scientific data, but if you look through history, you can see that story has been a common element of things that we have connected, that there are stories that are told through time. You just learn that people kind of do that. That's how we naturally communicate with each other, is through stories. But what I also want you to get is that stories aren't just something that's fun, right? Yeah, we enjoy watching TV, or maybe you enjoy the movies, or you enjoy going to the theater, whatever it is. But, and here's just as important, stories help people learn. The reality is that stories can be the best way to actually teach your people and help your people understand some things. Because look, here's the reality. Remembering facts and figures is really hard, but we can all remember stories. I mean, again, I couldn't name a lot of things from biology because, that was something where you just have to kind of memorize stuff. But I can tell you all kinds of stories, and I can remember stories that were told to me to help me learn lessons. See, that's why we use allegory to communicate messages. Now, if you don't know allegory is just a fancy word for basically telling stories to get a message across, to help people learn things. You can think of all kinds of the tortoise and the hare. When I say that, you immediately have a message come to your mind, which is the message of slow and steady wins the race. And we could talk about all kinds of other stories. You think of, you can think of Goldilocks and the 3 bears and how, the notion of just right and finding the thing that is just right for you. Again, all of these things are, you have a message that is associated with that story. See, that's the power of story. And I'll give you a more concrete example, which The Go-Giver. It's a powerful book. It's my favorite book. I say it's my business Bible. It's memorable and is told as a story. It's not about an argument. They don't try to convince you of things. They simply tell you this allegorical story of someone learning lessons that ultimately has this powerful message and powerful meaning. And it is way more powerful and memorable because it's told as a story. Whereas if it were just a nonfiction book about, the reason why we should give as part of our business, it wouldn't have the same impact. So that's a simple example of how story can have power. So kind of what we should come to here is that stories will help your audience learn and remember your message. And they also let you connect with them or them connect with you at the same time when you do it right. But stories are great because they're these things that can actually help you satisfy a bunch of different things and kind of accomplish multiple things. You can kind of help them learn and remember your message and connect all at once rather than doing it in different pieces. So that's the power of story, and that's why you need to be telling stories more. Now let's talk about this next piece, that you should be the star of most of the stories that you tell. And this is weird because look, the standard advice for entrepreneurs is that you shouldn't be the star, that you should be a guide. So you'll often hear people say that when you tell stories, you should be Obi-Wan Kenobi, not Luke Skywalker from the original Star Wars. The notion being that you are the guide who helps people and the star is your customer, the people you serve. That's the conventional wisdom. That's what most people are telling. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you don't need some of those stories, but the fact that that is what people are telling us should be all of our stories, or the focus of most of our stories, comes back to an old problem we've already thought about. It's because most people are focused pretty much exclusively on selling to people. And what I'll tell you is, in the convert stage, stories should definitely highlight how others have succeeded with your help. Those are called case studies, and you need to be able to tell case studies. You need to be able to talk about how your students who have applied what you teach and how they have had success as a result, or how you came in and worked with someone and it led to all of this success. You need to be able to do that. There's no question. But that's at the convert stage. And what these people who are saying that that's what all your stories should be about miss is that stories aren't just about selling. They're a vital part of building connection with your audience. And the stories where you're the guide are not how you connect with your audience. That's just not what those stories are for. The best way to build connection is to let your audience into your life, and you do that by telling stories that are about you. I mean, let's just put it very simply. Connection stories are by definition about you. You want them to connect with you, not with someone else. And so if you're trying to build that connection, the stories have to be about you. And what I'll tell you is that most of the stories you tell should be connection stories, because you should spend most of your time connecting, and then the selling is pretty easy. The conversion doesn't take as much work. So I just wanted to highlight this for you, that the day in, day out stories you tell are about you. Don't feel weird about that. A lot of people do because they've heard this mantra that stories shouldn't be about you. You should be the guide. And I'm simply telling you that when it comes to connecting with people, that's not the way it works. So at this stage, in kind of this part of the Badass Online Marketing Framework, you're telling stories that are about you. And that's absolutely the way to go. So now let's talk about the 4 types of connection stories. These are 4 different things that you kind of need to have in your repertoire. And what I'd say is, look, you'll create different stories for different situations. That's just the nature of things, because different situations require a different thing. So as you're going forward, you need to look for, okay, what story do I need to create to handle this situation? One type is called your origin story. Your origin story explains how you came to serve your people. Normally, it's a story of you walking the path you now help your audience walk, basically from kind of the hell to the heaven. When I say from the hell to the heaven, you tell the story about how you used to be struggling with the same things that your audience is struggling with. And you're not talking about your audience or anything like that. You're just talking about how when I was getting started, and you'll hear me talk about this, that when I was starting out an online business, I couldn't make anything work. I would try to put things out there. I would put out lead magnets, and maybe people would join. But I tried launching. I tried following the guidance everyone said, and I made no money. In fact, I lost a bunch of money. And I couldn't figure out why no one was paying attention to me. And then I recognized what I was missing. And so what you're going to have is the hell is you talk about how you were struggling. And that should be literally using language, using the same kinds of, talking about the same pain points that your people are struggling with. Then you identify the moment of change. What was it that changed for you, that put you on a different path? It's kind of like your aha or your epiphany moment. And then when you started doing something differently, and then you talk about the heaven. In other words, how now, having made that change, you're living the life you want. And again, I use that living the life you want in a very broad way. But in other words, you're going to talk about how now you have success, you have what you want. And hopefully, again, when you're talking about that, you talk about how, in the language that your audience would like. So I would tell the story. The hell is struggling, spending money, not connecting, not being able to get anyone to buy, not getting anyone to pay attention to me. No matter what I did, it wasn't work. Then my moment of change. And then I talk about, and now I built this business where I thrive, where I have people who come and buy from me as if by magic, where I don't have to sell hard, where I don't have to do any of those things. And I'm able to actually kind of, I have a team that helps me, that makes my life easy, and that I love every moment of every day. So you can kind of see how I can tell that story. And I didn't even tell it whole here because it's a long story that I could tell. But it's about helping people see that. And so that's what I want you to get a sense. Now, your origin story is how you frame your About Me page and the bio just about everywhere else. This should be the story that can connect with your audience over and over and over again. And you want them to see this repeated, understand that story you've gone through. And here's something that I've got to note. Your origin story is weird. It's a hybrid story. It helps people connect with you and helps convert because the process worked for you. In a sense, this is you being a case study for your own thing you're now teaching. And so that's why it's different than most other stories. Most other stories are either a connection story or a conversion story. This one is both because it helps you to connect with your audience because they can say, man, Bobby suffered just like me. Bobby understands the pain I'm going through. That is a deep level of connection that helps. But at the same time, you hear me talk about how my system, how my way of approaching business worked for me. And you say, okay, it worked for him. Okay. He was suffering the same thing. It worked for him. It'll probably work for me. So you can see how it fits both. I just point that out so you understand that it's a different kind of story. But that's your origin story. The next type of story is called a message story or message stories. This is a personal story that allows you to convey a message to your audience. It's basically the classic use of an allegory to get a point across. It's, stories with a message, with kind of something that you can explain and draw an analogy and help people understand what this means and why this is an important kind of learning experience. These are the stories you tell on a day-to-day basis as you present your views of the world and why people need to do these things. I'll talk about, stories where I learned from my dad and, he ran a business when I was growing up. And so how, I learned from him and it wasn't like what most people are teaching in the online space and how I implement the things that I learned from him. I have all kinds of stories about that. Including a story about this thing I tell a lot, that he had a sign on his desk. He ran a chain of drugstores. He had a sign on his desk that anyone who came to see him would see. It said, there's 2 rules of business. Rule number 1, the customer is always right. Rule number 2, if the customer is ever wrong, refer back to rule number 1, which kind of I take and I tell that story to help people understand that I took an important message from that service comes first. And if you want to build a successful business, serve the heck out of your people. And so you can see how it's a story that relates to what I do. That's one example. But here's another example. I tell the story of my dad being in a plane crash before my 3rd year in law school. And I tell this story how literally at one moment, I flew down to where he was. He was kind of out of it. He hadn't woken up at a point where I had to make a decision whether I stayed where my dad was or went back to compete in what was a true honor. It's this competition put on by Harvard Law School every year that is kind of an honor. You get to argue before a Supreme Court justice in most years. If you have gotten to that point, it was the final round. I had spent the entire year prior preparing, winning different things to get to that point, and how I had to make a choice whether to stay there with my dad who had not woken up yet or go back and compete in this kind of once in a lifetime opportunity, and how I had to make that choice, and how one of his friends pulled me aside and said, there is no choice. When your dad wakes up, he's going to be pissed off if you didn't go. And so I tell that story to make the point that we're always going to face challenges. Life is going to throw things in our way. And we're going to have to decide how to respond to that and how to try to make life and work coexist. And I tell that story, and I'll tell you, it's in one of my emails that people get in my welcome sequence. And it's the story that connects the most with people, because it makes this point at a deep level about decisions we have to make. And so again, you can see how it's helping people. It was something that really wasn't about business at the time, but now I can apply to business and help people understand the need for us to be committed and to be willing to fight for what we believe in. So that's another example of a message story. You get the point. These are stories that let you kind of make a deep message and help your audience understand something. Then there are what I call vignette stories. These are really just short and sweet message stories that aren't major events, just like little tidbits of everyday life that we use to make a point. And so it's these are the things I like to joke are Seinfeld episodes. If you're a fan of Seinfeld, if you watched it, I mean, they would make an entire episode about some tiny little moment. And that's kind of what these vignette stories are. It's you pulling a message out of one of those tiny little moments or tiny little stories, not some major thing. And most times they're things that aren't directly related to your business. Sometimes they are, but most times they're not. These are the perfect stories to use in weekly emails to your list and for our social media posts, because they're kind of the things that just give people a window into you as a person. And that's what they help with. So here are some examples that I've told. One is what I call the Lice-capade story. It's the story I tell about how, like a week and a half into my daughter's first year in public school in kindergarten, we got an email from the school saying there was a confirmed case of lice in her class, and how that took me on this 4-hour, thing to the depths of the internet about how to make sure we were not going to get lice in my house, because I didn't want that, right? So we were doing that. And I twisted it, or not twisted, I kind of turned it and said, I was only able to do that because of the kind of business I have, because I'm not trading hours for dollars, because, I have built a business that allows me this freedom. So you can see how I kind of turned it and made that relevant. The Sweet Baby Jesus story. This is one of my classic emails of all time. It was an email I sent on Easter week of 2019. The subject line was, I don't like Sweet Baby Jesus. And I immediately diffused it because it's about the beer. There's a beer from a brewery up here in the Washington, D.C. area. It's not here. It's in Maryland, I believe, called Sweet Baby Jesus. And I told the story. What spurred it was literally I saw one in the back of my fridge. One of my friends had brought it over, and it was just back there because no one drinks it because it's an atrocity of a beer. And I was making the point that beer is horrible because it's overcomplicated. And business should be simple, not complicated. So that's what the point of that story was. Then I have my infamous text story. This is the story of I was at a live event. It was my first ever live event with in the entrepreneurship space. And I took a picture and the influencer who was running it like photobombed. I was taking a picture with someone on our team, like a selfie, and this big name person who my wife knew of because I talked about her before, like photobombed me in a really ridiculous way. I saw that picture that night in my hotel room, and I sent it to my wife. Well, it was already, the event was on the West Coast. I live on the East Coast, so my wife had already gone to bed. So I wake up the next morning with a text back from her. Why are you sending me pictures of you with random women? Because it hadn't occurred to me my wife wouldn't know by sight who these people were. And I use that story to make the point that, look, those of us building online businesses, we kind of live in a different world, and we need to have a community of people who get us. And it was an invite to invite people to join my Facebook group, which is a group of people who get us. So that was kind of the idea there. But you can see how these are like just little tidbit stories from my life, but you can see how they let people start to get me. Number one, those 3 stories, you learn I've got a daughter, you learn about how old she is, you learn that I'm crazy about not wanting to get lice. Hopefully that's not things, but also I can be obsessive and spend like 4 hours going down that. You learn I like beer, but I don't like complicated beer. And I think, that the same thing. And then also you learn I'm married. and that I sometimes do things that are dumb, and, that luckily my wife still loves me anyway. So you learned all those little things about me that if you didn't know anything, just hearing those stories will let you get those things and understand those things about me and my personality. So you can see how these little tidbit stories help people connect with you. So that's kind of the vignette stories. Then the final category are cause stories. These are stories that help people understand why you are passionate about the causes that motivate your business. Like, why is it, for example, I might have something that help people understand, why do I get up on a soapbox about, the things that are wrong in the online space? Those are the kinds of things that help people get that. Like, these help your audience connect to you to the deeper why that motivates you in your business. Like, for me, I could talk about the fact that I have seen so many entrepreneurs who probably could have succeeded, but they came into the space and they heard these false promises for people and got false beliefs and spent all the money with these people, and it didn't work. And so they were convinced it was them, so they gave up. And I would say the problem with that is that they were given the wrong approach, not that they didn't have a good business idea. And it drives me nuts and it breaks my heart seeing that happen to them. Right? So that's the kind of story I could tell to help people understand why I'm so passionate about what I do, why I view what I'm doing as a cause, not simply as a way to make money. And when people can feel that and feel that emotion from you, guess what? Even if they don't have it as a cause for them, they're going to be like, well, I like that Bobby has a cause, that Bobby has a mission. So those stories are incredibly powerful. And that's kind of the last category for you to add to your repertoire. So, summing up, stories about you and your life are the best way to connect with your audience. Period, full stop. Now, stories let them learn facts about you. If you tell stories in an authentic way, they'll just kind of learn kind of how you operate in day-to-day life, and think about the power of that. And then people will start to associate you with those things. I tell enough stories about beer that a lot of people in my audience start to associate me with beer. And so that when they see beer or when they're around it, it maybe for just for a fleeting second, they think about me, and you're saying, oh yeah, Bobby, you're full of yourself thinking that. No, I've had people tell me that. Think about the power of that. When you're, so associated with these things that they will actually start to just think about you at various times. That's the power of telling stories that are actually about you. So, start collecting stories that will connect with your audience, and then start telling them. So collect them, think about them, and then start telling those stories. And what I'll tell you is, you can try this. You're not going to go wrong here. Just do the work of starting the process. And when you do, some stories won't connect, but some will. And that's all that really matters. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, you'll learn how to create content that connects with your audience, which is kind of the next substantive piece of stuff you need to be creating for connection. So we'll dive into that in the next lesson, and I'll see you there.